Welcome to the Vantage HR Influencers Podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Vantage Circle, the leading employee benefits and engagement platform.
Hi everyone, this is Rohit from Vantage HR Influencers Podcast, and today I'm excited to have Saurabh Nigam, who holds a postgraduate degree in Personnel Management and Industrial Relations from XLRI Jamshedpur, India. Saurabh is a VP HR from Omidyar Network India and is a regular speaker at various national and international conferences. Welcome to the show, Saurabh.
Thanks, Rohit. Pleasure to be here.
So, how did you get into the role of HR, and how did you make your way into Omidyar Network?
Sure. I'm an engineer by background for my bachelor's degree, and just like many folks of my age group, I started my career as a software coder. Did coding for about 3 years, and there was an internal job posting in my first organization called Canbay for a trainer on the software application on which I used to code, and I somehow went for it, got selected, and my last about 6 to 8 months in my first job, I was a subject matter expert trainer on coding on the application I used to, and that was my first experience or exposure to training stroke HR as a function, and I just got interested in the kind of impact you were able to create in the organization on the people of the organization, and that's how I really got interested about this domain itself. So I ended up doing an MBA from XLRI with a specialization in HR. And since then, it's been a little over 13 years of HR experience. Mostly in early stage, high growth industries, offline, retail, BFSI, e-commerce, KPO. My current stint, Omidyar Network, I've been with Omidyar Network for about 3 years now. And the reason this role attracted me here is because I work here with our industry organizations on their various human capital needs and challenges. And what's really attracted me about this opportunity was the fact that it allows me to leverage my experience of last 13, 14 years working across different early stage organizations and using that to contribute my bit towards organizations which are looking to create positive impact on the lives of people. So it's really a win-win in that sense.
Interesting. From coding to HR is the first one I've heard, but sort of during such times of crisis, or we're recording the podcast when the COVID-19 situation is still there. How would you refine company values during such a crisis?
Sure. So, Rohit, to be absolutely candid, I feel if you need to refine your values in the time of crisis and crisis like this, then there's something fundamentally wrong with your values itself, right? And the reason I say that is because values are supposed to be your guiding light in the times of a crisis. They should assist you in decision making when the going gets tough. So if there's a question mark on your values just because we are in a crisis, then I think what you've defined as your values all this while itself needs to be asked. So if you really ask me, the way I look at it in times of crisis, instead of refining your values, you actually should look at them to reinforce. Look to reinforce them by using them in your planning to respond to this crisis, right? And an example I can quote is from my own organization at Omidyar Network. We have these 5 culture attributes, which are accountability, boldness, diversity, empathy, and trust, right? And as this entire COVID-19 crisis unfolded in India, starting mid-March, late March, we very soon realized that the real need of the hour is to figure out how we can contribute as an organization towards mitigation of the crisis which has come up in the lives of people. And that's how we came up with our new initiative called Rapid Response Funding Initiative, right? Wherein we earmarked a sum of close to 10.5 CR, which was put together to provide funding to organizations which are working on relief work related to COVID-19. Now, a key driver for us to come up with this initiative were really our values of boldness and empathy, right? Wherein we very quickly pivoted and said that, while we are in the space of impact investment, we need to come up with an initiative which is driven towards the need of the hour, which is basically response to this crisis. So that's really where boldness came in, and the empathy was really towards the fact that that's really the need of the hour for the people of the country. And also the last bit which really push us to come up with this initiative was the fact that we've always wanted to make sure that we are accountable towards the mission of the organization, which is really to create impact on the lives of people. right? So the point I'm trying to drive here is that it's really the values which should drive your decision making in good times and bad times and times of crisis. So there's no question of refining your company values.
Right.
And if you're pushed to do that, then there's something fundamentally wrong there.
Got it. And how about founders or leaders who are trying to build a new organization? What are are there any top 3 or 4 things needed to build a culture from the leadership perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think my fundamental belief, Rohit, is that when you're starting an organization,
Right.
there are possibly 100 different things which you look to do, right? And starting from fundraising to getting your product market fit right, getting your team in place, and so on and so forth. I think in building and figuring out what is the culture, stroke, ways of working you're going to define in your organization and hold sacrosanct, got to be your top 3 to 5 got to be in your top 3 to 5 priorities.
Right.
And the reason I say that is because culture building really starts from the day you decide to bring in the second person after you into the organization, right? And unless you focus on it, it becomes that much more difficult. So how do you go about doing it? I think the number one thing is the fact that you got to be authentic, right? You got to be authentic about what you're thinking of or what you're trying to define as ways of working, or as we call it, the culture in the organization. Because if you're not authentic, it will show. You can't build a culture or values in an organization which you yourself don't believe in as a leader, right? So being authentic is absolutely critical. Also, I mean, it's almost a cliche to say this, but leading from the front when it comes to defining culture, defining values in your organization, this is absolutely critical. More so in times like these when we are in a crisis phase, right? In a crisis. And then add to that the fact that, while, again, it's almost a cliche to say that the culture gets driven from the top. But I think as leader, how open you are to feedback and doing course corrections, even in the case of defining culture and defining values for the organization, is very, very important. And finally, as they all say, you got to walk the talk as leader, right? So it's one thing to articulate, define your values and culture and your way of working, but as a leader, if you're not walking that path, there is no way you're gonna have that imbibed in your organization.
Correct. And during such times, how would you communicate the company's culture to employees? They could be job cards or salary cards. How do you maintain that sort of positivity to employees?
Sure. So as I said just like a little while earlier, right? Your values, your culture are really it's your ways of working, really, right? And
Right.
it's your guiding light. It's your principles which define your decision making, which defines how you react to a situation as an individual, as a team, as an organization, right? So and that's why a lot of thought has to go into figuring out what those values, stroke culture are for you, right? Now, in times of crisis like these, I think one of the most important things you should need to do is to make sure that you're using every possible opportunity, whether you're conveying a good news or a bad news, whether there are celebrations, meetings, all hands, trainings, engagement activities, whatever may be the case, you got to use that opportunity to reiterate and re-emphasize how you have used your culture, stroke values to come up with your decision making and how it got played out in each of these scenarios. I think that's very, very important, because otherwise there will be a disconnect between what you've defined as your ways of working and what you're actually doing on the ground. So that's number one, right? So every single time you're interacting or there is a connect with your team, with your organization, making sure that you're talking and reiterating and re-emphasizing your values is important. Similarly, while as a leader, as I said, you've got to lead from the front, but it is also important to figure out and spot your change agents, or as I call them, the culture ambassadors, to ensure that they are the ones who are reinforcing your culture and values in the organization. And the reason I say that is because as you grow as an organization, doing this all by yourself as an individual is practically impossible. So just as an example, at Omidyar Network, we have what we call as a culture crew. It basically comprises of 6 or 7 individuals pulled in from different teams, different verticals. And they really are the drivers of culture, stroke values in the organization, right? That's very important. And finally, as far as communication channels are concerned, right? So again, almost a cliche, but you got to use every possible communication channel, whether it's your email, company newsletters, memos, company decks, press releases, again, to reinforce, reiterate your values and how you have used them in your decision making, in your strategy, in your way forward. So those are some of the things which we can use to, communicate the company's culture to employees in an environment like this.
Interesting. And what happens in an organization is that there are people who be bachelors or the people who are married with kids. How do you define priorities for in such a situation where there are different people with different backgrounds and they have to work together when they're working from home?
Sure. So I think first thing first, there's been a realization for us as well in the last 6 to 8 weeks is that it's a given that we are no longer in business as usual mode, right?
Right.
And then it's extraordinary circumstances, which means that as an organization, one of the first things you need to figure out is that because there is a new normal which is being defined, uh, what is the goalpost you're going to be chasing, right? Because your circumstances have changed, we're not in a BAU mode. There has to be a redefinition of the what you're going to chase as an organization, which sometimes we call as goalpost, right? So I think it starts from there, right? So as leader or as leadership team, it's absolutely imperative for you to go back to your discussion board and figure out what you're going to prioritize and what you're going to deprioritize at an organization level. That's I think the number one step. I think one of the inputs as you do that is to recognize, as you rightly said, that within the organization, your team members are no longer in a homogeneous state, right? So when you're in an office setup, it's the same for everybody, right? So I mean, we are in an office and it's exactly the same for everyone. The timings, the environments, the ways of working, everything is same for everyone. So it's a homogeneous. But as you rightly said, the fact that we are working remotely, all of us, goes far beyond just the fact that okay, we have moved from office to home and then now we are working all together in the same environment. It's not. The environment changes for everyone depending on the life stage they are in. So how a bachelor works in a work from home environment and the challenges he or she faces is going to be very different to compared to somebody who's got say 2 kids or one young kid at home, right?
Right.
So keeping that in mind while you figure out what your revised goalpost for the organization is absolutely important, simply because that will tell you what are the capacity stroke capability which exists with you in the team right now, right? It's not just a question of 100 people who are working in office are working at home. So let's everything else being the same. So once you define your goalpost, then I think it's a question of making sure that every single person in the organization understands what that revised goalpost is, and then using that to then almost figuring out or redefining what are the expectations from every single individual, because that's bound to change. It has to change, right? And then the fact that you've taken that input, which is telling you that every single individual is in a different state, will also allow you to then redefine their body of work, which ultimately will contribute towards the organization reaching this revised goalpost which you've come up with, right? So I think that it goes hand in hand, but it has to start with organization figuring out where do they want to land, or where are they expected to land after given the crisis we are in.
Correct. And, since employees are not physically present in a room or in a physical place, how can we encourage an environment of, open feedback and communication, since most of the communication is either happening through WhatsApp, Slack, or Zoom?
Sure. So I think open feedback stroke communication really is a question of how authentic you are in your conversations with individuals, right? And authenticity in conversation comes with trust, right?
Right.
So it really boils down to how much you have invested in building a culture of trust in your organization, which ultimately will lead to authentic conversations happening in your organization. And authentic conversation need not just be about feedback, by the way, right? So I think given the fact that we are in this crisis, will test the degree of trust which exists in the organization. If you have a high trust environment and culture and you have invested in building that kind of a culture, you won't find it difficult to have those candid conversations in the organization just because you're sitting remote, right? On the
Right.
contrary, if your culture in the organization hasn't developed to the extent that there is enough trust in the environment, trust between individuals, trust between peer-to-peer, peer-to managers, then obviously it's going to be extremely, extremely difficult for you to drive home those conversations, candid conversations, including feedback to people. More so that because you're sitting in a remote environment, right? So I think it really boils down to the time invested to building culture of trust. If you haven't, then the time is now to start doing that, right? And how do you build a culture of trust? It actually starts with you, right? The willingness, your willingness as a leader to trust others, trust your team members, will drive trust from their side on you as well, right? So, and if you haven't done that, if you haven't invested enough in doing that, then you need to do that in order to have those authentic conversations going forward. Otherwise, it's not going to happen.
Right. No, interesting, because you pointed out that it's important to trust others and trust with other team members, and also keep the communication open at all times.
Oh, absolutely. It starts with that. There is no way, Rohit, I can expect you to trust me unless I exhibit my trust on you, right? Unless you feel confident that I trust you, there is no way you're going to trust me.
Correct. Do you think, are there any downsides or, upsides of remote working? And do you think after the COVID-19 situation, is the remote thing going to be a permanent thing among organizations? What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. So there are different upsides. I mean, I think we have heard this for many years, this entire concept or this entire thing around flexible work schedules and flexibility around working and allowing giving opportunities to team members to work out out of their homes. So I mean, there are definite upsides, and I think few of the upsides which I can immediately think of is if you're working in bigger cities like say Bombay, Delhi, or Bangalore.
Right.
Then obviously you're saving time spent on commute. I mean, we end up spending a lot of time on commute, which frankly speaking, it's unproductive. I mean, it's unhealthy as well. So I think that's one of the biggest upsides of working from home, because you're saving a lot of time for yourself, right? Also, I think the fact that you're working from home means that it will not be a normal office, right? So you have the flexibility to work, for example, work from your favorite corner, a favorite room, or balcony for that matter, right? Things which are not possible in a work setup, right? You can have a better control on your schedule, plan your home responsibilities far more efficiently compared to when you're in an office setup, right? So if managed well, meetings can be more fun. I mean, that's what I'm realizing, that virtual meetings where everybody is sitting from home can be real fun. Like you can have these virtual backgrounds which you just talked about. You can have fun moments sitting at home. So meetings can be a lot more fun than actually stressful. And then in a lot many ways, you can expect better work-life balance, especially if you're living with family. Not just your spouse and your kids, but also if your parents are living with you, you definitely can expect more work-life balance, because it allows you more face time with your folks, which is always good for relationships. So those are definite upsides. But there are downsides, and then we are all realizing that extended work from home does have challenges, right? And does create challenges. So for one, you can feel isolated and disconnected with your colleagues, right? So your ability to go pick up a chai or go and have a coffee break and chit chat with your colleagues and your team members, that just goes away, right? That personal connect just goes away, and that can be very, very disturbing, especially if you're living alone, for example. Similarly, if you're living with family, there can be more distractions. If you have young kids, there can be a lot of distractions, right? So which can be stressful as well. I think work from home also makes you much more reliant on tech infra, right? Because you got to have your laptop working, your Wi-Fi working, your phones working. Otherwise, you're completely cut off, right? Which is not the case so much in an office setup, because there are backups and there are redundancies which are created. I also feel that when you're doing an extended work from home, unplugging from work and keeping that demarcation between your work, professional work, and your personal life can be sometimes very challenging, right? So which also means that I've heard stories of people working for much more longer hours than possibly they do when they were in an office setup, which also then leads to that if you're working in a setup where there are multiple time zones, it can be very difficult when you're working from a work from home kind of setup. So there are different downsides as well. Now, where would the world move is anybody's guess. I know there's a lot of talk around, and the companies which have taken the call about extended work from home, right, till the end of the year, extended it to till next year as well. It saves you a lot of costs as an organization from a real estate perspective. There's absolutely no doubt about it. And there are definite upsides for individuals, which I just mentioned as well. Whether it's going to become a norm or not, given the downside and the challenges as well, I'm not very sure about it, right? What I'm 100% sure about the fact that the acceptance towards having this flexibility or giving this flexibility to your people, to your employees, so that they can work from home whenever they want to, which has been a hot topic for discussion for many years. I think that acceptability towards that will be much better or much
Right.
higher from organizations. Whether we will move majority of our workforce to work from home, anybody's guess. I really can't say.
And do you think a lot of women would also come back into the workforce who had to take a break because of the children? Because I think once you're working in a remote work, it becomes easier for them to take care of the children as well as work.
I hope so, and I definitely believe so as well, that it would. But for that to happen, I think there will be a requirement for a need, and there will be a need for a mindset shift in the way organizations look at work and define their work and body of work. As I said, work from home and extended work from home is not just a question of you're moving your people from office to work. There has to be redefinition of how what you're going to chase, how you're going to chase, how you would operate, and also the understanding that within at home, different people will be facing different challenges, right? So having that in your mind and then having the ability to take care of that while you define your work will be very important in order for we to see a shift in the women who've taken breaks from your career coming back. But I'm certainly very, very positive about that.
Correct. And Saurabh, do you think are there any tools which employers can use to measure the employee engagement among remote team workers?
Sure. So I think the simplest and easiest thing to do to have a real-time pulse check is having conversations with your team members, right? And
Right.
obviously, as I said, it requires high degree of trust in your culture, in your environment, for people to open up to you, to leaders, and share candidly how they're feeling, how motivated they are, what is the morale like. Obviously, if you do not have that culture of trust, then these direct conversations will not give you meaningful insights into what is the real pulse of the organization. But I definitely feel that in times like these, having that or maintaining that personal connect is extremely important to ensure that you have a pulse going with you. Obviously, it is easier to do in organizations which are smaller. As you grow, then it becomes that much more difficult. Now, so what do you do next, right? So I think one obvious thing is that coming up with a tool or a small survey kind of a thing, which is easy to take up by employees, by your team. Focusing on health and well-being of employees, their family, professional motivation, and overall morale is something which you can look to do. You should look to do, especially when your organization is beyond the size wherein one-on-one connects on a regular basis with everybody may not be a possibility. And then finally, there are many survey tools out there available in the market, right? And there are many such tools, good ones, which allows you to roll out those surveys across board, multi-geography, and then gives you enough and more insights in terms of what exactly the pulse of the organization is. My only caveat there is that you should look to do that only if your organization is of a scale which doesn't allow you to have those personal connects or do your own small pulse surveys. So that's where I would advise you to actually go for tools like those. But there are many good tools available out there in the market.
Correct. And what is happening now in organizations is you find Gen Zs and the millennials who are getting up to be leaders in organizations, and they have a very different priorities from people who are boomers and older generations. What is the best way to make sure that the careers of Gen Zs and Gen Ys or the millennials can grow? Their goals can be in transit with how the goals of a company is.
Yeah. I think that's a pretty broad question and very relevant, I would say. See, the fact of the matter is, in any decision which you make or the body of work which you create,
Right.
the interest of the organization has to be at the core, right? I mean, you're employing people because there is a mission to be achieved, right? There's something to be achieved, which is really what your organization's goalposts are, right? So I think that it starts from there. And then when you have that the recognition of the fact that people from different generations come in with different expectations, different aspirations, different styles of working is extremely important, right? And then having a very strong understanding of how you define your body of work needs to be aligned with the expectations and aspirations of individuals coming from different generations will allow you to then define your ways of working accordingly, right? So the two things have to happen parallelly, which is really you figuring out how you're going to define or cut define your body of work, different bodies of work within the organization, by understanding the different needs and aspirations of the individuals, the leveraging the strength of an individual coming from a particular generation, and then marry the two. I think that's really the way to go forward. Easier said than done. I definitely understand, but I think the way that gets solved for is also when you have a very strong culture driving this forward, right? And that culture really needs to also address the fact that ultimately what matters is when all of us come together, coming from different organizations, different backgrounds and different generations, is taking the interest of the organization forward, right? So if your culture is able to drive that, then I think pulling together people from different generations is not that difficult.
And do you have any suggestions for team leaders or startup founders on how to remain calm in such stressful situations?
Uh, as I said, I think the first and the foremost thing for any leader, any entrepreneur, founder is to recognize that this is a new normal, right?
Right.
I think recognizing and accepting the fact that we have gotten into this new or an extraordinary circumstances which has kind of forced us to define a new normal is the starting point, and you cannot be in denial of that. I think that's the starting point, because until you recognize and accept that, you will not go to the next step, which is really based on the fact that we are getting into new normal, figuring out what you need to prioritize and more importantly what you need to deprioritize, right? The fact that we are no longer in the same world or the same environment which existed 3 months back should force you to prioritize and deprioritize at an organization level, at an individual level as well. Once you do that, then obviously you need to communicate and over communicate with your leaders, with your team members, with the organization at large, so that everybody understands the two things. One, the fact that we are in a new normal as an organization. Therefore, what exactly are your priorities? Because that will then lend itself into what at an individual level I need to do, what I need to focus on, right? And then the final thing I would say is that making sure that you stay connected with your team. Use different tools, techniques, ways of staying connected. It's easier when everybody is in an office setup, even if it is geographically spread out. You can go to offices, meet people, and that connect is a very different kind of connect. So the fact that we are in a remote working, all of us are in remote working, and we're gonna stay in this remote working mode for some time. Right. Figuring out ways and means of staying connected with your team is super critical.
Correct. And I quickly want to do the top three. What's your favorite business book?
So there's one book which I'm really fond of and advise pretty much everybody to read. It's a book called Crucial Conversation by Joseph Graney. And then the reason I love this book is because the premise with which this book starts, it talks about the fact that if you look at any problem, right, any issue, any problem between two individuals, between two teams, between organizations, or between countries for that matter, and you trace it back, right? Trace back that problem. It says invariably you are in a problem situation or you are in a soup because you haven't, or somewhere a conversation which was critical, which was important, did not happen the way it should have happened, right? So it really that's the premise with it starts. So it basically then talks about how do you enable and equip yourself to have crucial conversations in the way they should be had, and not have it not mess it up, or avoid having crucial conversations, because that then leads to various kinds of problems in personal and professional life. Right? So that's, to me, it's one of the best books I've read, and I'm really fond of it.
We'll put that in the show notes. Do you have any favorite HR leader or CEO whom you follow?
So I do follow a lot of HR leaders on both Twitter and LinkedIn. Some of the ones I can talk about: Prabir Jha, S.V. Nathan, Abhijit Bhadre. These are some of the immediate names which come to my mind of the HR leaders whom I follow.
And do you have any piece of advice for young HR leaders who want to move up the organization?
Absolutely. So I think, keeping aside the fact that you should know your subject, which is a given, right, I would say you got to be curious and not be afraid of challenging the status quo. And I'll elaborate why I say that. The sheer fact that, as HR professionals, you are entrusted with the responsibility of being the custodian of people practices,
right,
and understanding the pulse of the organization and coming up with practices which will resonate, whether it is around org design, compensation structures, performance systems, culture, engagement, means that you need to continuously evolve and innovate with the changing needs and aspirations of the people while balancing the org priorities. Right. So what I'm really saying is that what worked, say, 5 to 10 years back in any stream of people practices may not necessarily work in today's environment. And a really good example is the fact that is the environment or the circumstances we are in, right? COVID-19, no one thought we're going to be in a situation like this, right? Where every single individual is working remotely. Now, as an HR professional, if you're not curious, if you're not figuring out new ways of, as we just talked about, engaging with people, communicating with people, defining culture, then you're going to be found wanting in your job, right? And then you're not true to your job. So being curious and not being afraid to challenge the status quo, I think is super, super important for an HR professional to be successful in his or her role.
So what is the best way people can reach out to you and know more about you?
So fairly active on LinkedIn, and I'm fairly active on Twitter as well. My Twitter handle is SZ Nigam, and exactly the same thing is for my LinkedIn page as well, SZ Nigam.
We'll put that in the show notes. So thank you so much for taking your time and speaking to us. I really enjoyed speaking to you.
Rohit, likewise. Thanks a lot for having me here.
Thanks for listening to Vantage HR Influencers Podcast. Please do subscribe to Vantage HR Influencers Podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify for new episodes.